This video is brought to you by NordVPN. For as long as many of our viewers have been alive, Southern Europe's economies have been looked down upon by Northern Europe's. Southern economies like Italy, Greece and Spain used to be considered spendthrift, less productive and, in at least certain circles, the primary cause of the Eurozone crisis. They were even given the degrading acronym PIGS, standing for Portugal, Italy, Greece and Spain. However, in the past couple of years, the tables have apparently turned. Southern European economies have weathered the post-pandemic macroeconomic storm remarkably well, and are now set to be the fastest growing economies in the EU, proving that pigs can indeed fly. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why Southern Europe's economies underperformed in the early years of the Eurozone, why they're suddenly outperforming the economic powerhouses of the North, and whether this can last. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So to understand this story, you need some context. Southern European countries always had lower productivity and GDP per capita than countries like Germany, but the economic gap between Northern and Southern Europe was amplified by the Eurozone crisis. In short, in the 90s and early 2000s, many Southern European countries racked up some pretty significant debts. This probably had something to do with the introduction of the euro, which allowed Southern European Eurozone states to borrow at significantly lower rates than was previously possible. Portugal's debt-to-GDP ratio, for instance, rose from 50% in 1999 to about 70% in 2007, while Greece made little to no progress paying down its debt burden, which remained around 100% of GDP for most of the 2000s. After the Eurozone crisis, governments had to engage in massive spending to keep their economies afloat and their electorates happy. Public debt shot up, especially in Southern Europe, reaching 130% of GDP in Portugal, 100% in Spain, and as high as 170% in Greece. As borrowing costs rose and sovereign defaults loomed, these countries appealed for help from the EU and ECB. But more frugal Northern European economies made any bailouts contingent on the implementation of tough austerity measures. Unsurprisingly, this sparked a heated debate between the North and the South, and this is when the meme about Southern Europe being spendthrift slackers really took hold in the discourse. In the end, austerity won out, leading to brutal public service cuts and years of economic stagnation. Eurostat data from 2016 shows that there was still a very clear economic divide in terms of productivity between the North and South in the aftermath of the crisis. Italy's situation is especially noticeable. While productivity was 9% higher than the European average in 2005, this has gradually shrunk over the past 15 years. Similarly, Spanish productivity was roughly at the European average before the crash, but has since fallen to about 6% below, while remaining well below the European average in Greece and Portugal. However, in the past 3 years, things have started to change, and Southern Europe's economy is suddenly showing tentative signs of strength. Successful structural reforms and high inflation have helped much of Southern Europe balance their fiscal books. According to Eurostat, in 2022, Spain's deficit nearly halved, was basically erased in Greece, and Portugal actually ran a surplus representing 1.6% of its GDP. This is worth comparing to France, which announced earlier this month that it's on track to run an enormous budget deficit of over 5% this year. Similarly, recent data released last week from Capital Economics shows that Southern European economies have outgrown the industrial machine, that is Germany, by about 5% since 2017, and they're expected to continue outperforming throughout the rest of the year. Spain's economy in particular have stood out from the pack. Clever policies helped keep inflation relatively low last year, and in 2023 its economy grew by 2.5%, 5 times more than the Eurozone average. Italy has also seen an impressive rebound, enjoying a better post-COVID recovery than every other G7 economy in Europe, with GDP increasing by 4.2% since the end of 2019, compared to 1.9% in France, 1% in the UK, and just 0.1% in Germany. Greece's economy grew 2% last year, and is expected to grow by 2.3% this year, well above the Eurozone average. And Portugal isn't doing too bad either. The European Commission expects Portugal's GDP to grow by 1.2% in 2024, which is less than it was initially predicted, but is still above the EU and Eurozone average. Now, it's important not to overstate this. These are still pretty moderate growth rates, and a lot of this apparent contrast has to do with the fact that northern economies are having quite a rough time. Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden are all flirting with recession, and France is currently struggling with a dramatic budget crisis. Nonetheless, it's still a reversal of a long-standing trend. So, what explains it? Well, it's in part because austerity has, in a very limited sense, worked. After more than a decade of significant structural reforms and austerity, including spending cuts and tax increases, southern European economies are clearly more fiscally prudent than they were pre-2008. Credit rating agencies are, as a result, super happy with the South too. For instance, towards the end of last year, Greece's rating was raised to investment grade for the first time since the Eurozone crisis, and Spain's economic outlook was changed to positive last month. The second thing to note is the EU's €800 billion COVID recovery fund. Since its conception, this fund has predominantly benefited southern countries, with Italy and Spain the first and second largest beneficiaries of the fund, which has allowed them to better manage their heavy debt burden and finance structural reforms, which have become critical to developing their economies. Italy has estimated that the EU funds alone will boost their GDP by 3.4% by 2026. In general, southern European countries were also less exposed to the withdrawal of Russian gas, or at least less exposed than Germany, which has suffered a sharp slowdown in its vast manufacturing sector. And while Italy was actually pretty dependent on Russian gas pre-Ukraine, Meloni has done a great job of diversifying and has signed off big energy deals with Algeria and Qatar, meaning that Italy's Russian gas imports dropped from 40% of all imports in 2021 to 2.4% at the end of last year. Finally, Southern Europe has also been boosted by a rebound in tourism following the lifting of pandemic restrictions. Portugal saw a record revenue of €25 billion from tourism in 2023, and Greece enjoyed a 15.7% increase in tourism revenue last year. Now, it's important not to overstate all this. Southern European countries have endured a decade of stagnant growth, and are still significantly poorer than Germany and Scandinavia. Nonetheless, their recent success is evidence that, with Southern Europe's newfound fiscal prudence, greater fiscal union in the EU might be able to bridge Europe's north-south divide. Now, watching our videos, it's understandable if, at times, you feel like the world isn't terribly safe. And unfortunately, this can be the case online too. You might try your best to keep everything secure, maybe you try to rotate through favourite passwords online, but that's not always enough to keep you safe. In fact, the most common form of account hacking these days is called credential stuffing. Essentially, you use one of your normal passwords on a website that's poorly maintained, and then if it gets compromised, you could find that information landing on the dark web. Hackers then just attempt the same email and password combinations on your social network account, streaming services, banks, you get the point. Luckily for you, NordVPN has a whole bunch of tools that can keep you safe online. With their suite of threat protection tools, including a dark web monitor, which notifies you if someone leaks your credentials. It's not just that though, their threat protection can also warn you about phishing links and block malicious ads before you even see them. It really is all-round protection for your digital life. And if you sign up for a 2-year plan using our link, you'll not only get a massive discount, but you also get 4 extra months totally free. So if you want to support the channel and improve our journalism, then make sure that you use the link in the description so that they know that you came from us.